the Daily Objective. Today with me is James. Hey, James.
Hi.
And
How are
I'm
you?
Daniel, usually behind the scenes, but today when I read the news, I got so angry, I just had to be on, and I'm afraid of everything I'm gonna say today. Today we're gonna talk about basically the recent, let's say, change in course of Israel's war cabinet, and one of the top officials said that they are willing to consider the Palestinian Authority or the reformed Palestinian Authority taking over Gaza after the war, after Israel occupies it. But before we go to that, let's talk about the news. So we are on day 76 of the war. So far, when it comes to ground invasion, there have been 138 deaths. We have one piece of news that is not related to Israel. I just think we should really mention it, and we soon are definitely going to talk about it. And it's the Colorado Supreme Court deciding that or disqualifying Trump from the ballot. Uh, James, maybe you like a couple of words you want to say about this?
I think it'll quickly go to the Supreme Court. California is doing a similar thing. Other states are doing similar things. Some states have rejected doing it. So since different states have different opinions, that's getting with a bullet to the Supreme Court, and I think they will reverse Colorado, if you ask my opinion. Besides, in the meantime, the Republican Party doesn't even need to have a primary in Colorado. The party, as such, can opt out of the election system altogether and hold a caucus and just, so I don't think it'll have any immediate impact. Let me put it that way. But I'll leave it there for later discussion.
So the when I saw this, I got a bit scared because we've seen what happens when Trump lost, and I'm afraid to see what happens if he's
Oh no, he'll be
not.
canonized by some, and just from this the process.
Well, let's move on to the Israel news. So, we had one piece of news which we might talk about, but I'm not sure if there's time. If not, I believe we'll talk about it on the reality show. And it's that Hamas refuses to discuss prisoner swap until Israel stops its aggression. I also have it added. The Islamic Jihad has the same position on this. Sometimes we talk about the other groups in Gaza, but Islamic Jihad is one of them. So just wanted to add it here.
The holding hostages isn't a form of aggression. Huh. Okay. So Israel needs to stop its defensive actions in the face of their ongoing aggression because rockets keep coming from Hamas. They've still got hostages, children and old people hostages. And so that act of aggression it won't be dealt with until you stop your acts of self-defense. Got it. Check.
Uh, Still talking about the hostages, Hamas insists that the next hostage deal must include three prominent prisoners. Only one of them is considered a member of Hamas, but these three people include a potential Abbas successor, Israeli minister's assassin, and a bomb engineer who is currently serving 67 life sentences.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Violent thugs, terrorists like that, terrorist leaders, bombers, things, killers are who they insist on releasing. In exchange for what? Old people and 5-year-old girls? It's disgusting.
and I'm not sure if you see the pattern, but I think these three people will be very nicely served in the next October 7th if Hamas is not completely destroyed. Then we have one more, which is Hillary Clinton meets with hostage families. I just have one quote from that, which I almost would agree with. She said, as long as the hostages are not the main and primary target for Israel, then everything that I and President Biden say or do is of little value. And I would just hope Israel would think so too and would actually focus on Hamas
Miss,
and be
yes,
able to resist the pressure from the
Mrs.
global
Clinton is distinctly one of the better people in her party on this issue. We say that. I don't say a lot of nice things about the Clintons, but I definitely will say that Mrs. Clinton is on the better side in the Democratic Party on this issue, for sure.
Well, I think what she meant is Israel should care more about the hostages and negotiating and not about destroying Hamas.
Oh, well, she's got it backwards then, exactly. Of
That's
course.
why I think I agree with the quote. We just have a
A
different
quote, right?
conclusion.
Exactly. I'm not sure how to take the quote, but if she means that they should care more about the getting hostages home than killing the hostage takers, then she's got her values upside down, even though she is one of the more pro-Israel Democrats in my country.
And we have one more piece of news, but I talked to James and we agreed we should leave it for the end, since it's gonna be hard to continue after that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the main topic, which is Israel signaling that a reformed Palestinian Authority could take over Gaza after the war. And before we even go to James, when I read it, and basically let me summarize this for you. So let's agree that some sort of Palestinian organization will be reformed and will take over occupied Gaza, and we will pressure them or convince them to have some sort of election. What a novel idea. I would hope, I'm wondering if it ever happened. And of course it did. It happened after the Oslo Accords. It happened exactly the way they are talking about it now. They had some sort of reform Palestinian Authority that took over Gaza, or was allowed to basically take over Gaza after Israel left. And they had election. And what did they do? They elected in one side, they elected Hamas, which is the reason why we are talking about everything here right now. And the other party that won was the now I'm wonder, I might have the terms confused, but yeah, Fatah, which we
Is the
will
Palestinian authorities. Yeah,
we will
they're the
talk about
so-called moderates. Yeah,
the moderates who say, and I'm just gonna like all the quotes that I have here. I mean, the recent thing was that Palestinian authorities started to circulate a document claiming that the October 7 attacks were fabricated to
exactly.
allow
Oh,
for
no,
this
no,
war.
no. Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority that does control much of the West Bank, uh, came out on the day. This was the weekend when October 7th happened, and he said that the Gazans, Hamas, have a right to defend themselves. So he was immediately defending after October 7th Hamas's action. Full throated defense. Hamas is right. They're breaking out. They're the good guys. That's what Mahmoud Abbas said after October 7th. Fast forward a few weeks. He's now circulating all these myths that the Israelis were the ones who perpetrated October 7th. All of this October 7th denialism. Israel, they pulled off an attack with their own helicopters, apparently, killing their own people just in order to create an excuse. So they're willing to kill their own civilians, in apparently in horrific ways too, just to create an excuse so they could attack Hamas. Um, that's obviously nonsense, but it comes from a boss who got his PhD in Holocaust denial. The man has, he's taken it back to some extent, but he got his PhD saying that 6 million Jews were not killed. And it was more like 800,000. And even those were only killed for not anti Semitic reasons. And by the way, to whatever extent they were killed, it was all just a Zionist plot to create Israel. That's how nutty he is about the Nazis and the Holocaust. It was all just a, yeah, you get this. See, just like October 7th, was really pulled off by the Israelis just to attack Hamas. So a much less of a Holocaust actually occurred, and it was really just a Zionist plot to create Israel. Now that's the nuttiness that this guy has. Now, to some extent, he's taken back his comments about the Holocaust, but no. In 2012, he was given a chance. He was given a direct offer by Israel to have 95% of the West Bank be an independent state under the Palestinian Authority's control, and he turned it down. He admits it. I mean, the accusations of corruption are mild compared to obviously this stuff, but a former a guy who's connected with him, a Palestinian who's finance connected with him, said that he's worth over $100 million. Now, how does a terrorist become that rich being a terrorist? He's obviously siphoning aid and so forth, getting sweetheart deals. Both he and his sons apparently have made millions of dollars from their political position and corruption. So they're a heavily corrupt group, and that is used by the Hamas faction to say we can't trust them. And Israel, of course, points out the corruption. So does it need to be reformed? Well, the corruption, as I say, is mild compared to the fact that these leaders are defending October 7th, denying the atrocities on October 7th, blaming Israel for October 7th, and that their leaders repeatedly turned down offers for peace and a Palestinian state on the West Bank. Now, as you pointed out, we've been through this before. We've got this is deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra, the baseball manager in America, famously said. It feels like deja vu all over again. It sure does, because we've done this before. We've done this before. Hamas gained control over Gaza because they unilaterally were given it by Israel, in effect, as well. Now, when you put together the radical votes that they got, that was a clear majority. But even the minority votes that went to the minority parties like Fatah, we're talking about a party, Fatah, who endorsed October 7th, who's denying October 7th, and is led by a Holocaust denier who's turned down offers of peace from Israel in the past. This is madness. This is madness. Now, obviously, Israel is playing to an international. First of all, they're under insane pressure from the American government to do exactly this. We want you to think ahead. We can't have a permanent Israeli occupation of Gaza. We have to have a two-state solution. That's the pressure that's coming from Israel's only semi-ally, America. And our diplomats have been, we sent our Minister of Defense and our Foreign Secretary over there over to pressure Israel in just this respect. So Israel, I'm sure, is thinking, okay, we've got to, in some way, now think of that, the logic process going on here, in some way appease world opinion, accept a group of people who have endorsed October 7th as the alternative to Hamas in Gaza. That's madness.
Yeah. And let me just quickly point out, and we talked about this yesterday when a lot of times, well, that's just Hamas, that's just Fatah. The Palestinian people are innocent. Well, we talked about the recent poll. We talked about it yesterday, but we can also mention it today. Only 7% of Palestinians even believe that there were atrocities committed on October 7th.
That's right. You ask 70%, apparently, and this poll was not just in Gaza. This poll included Palestinians in the West Bank. And so apparently about 70% of all Palestinians, 70%, whether they're in Gaza or the West Bank. Now, I know that you could criticize the methodology of the polls and stuff, but even assuming it's a rough estimate, it's roughly correct. We have a vast majority, more than 2/3. In fact, if anything, it's stronger in the West Bank. By the numbers I can see. So what we're looking at is a strong, more than 2/3, maybe 3/4 majority of the population in the West Bank who's pro-October 7th, or at least denying October 7th. They either say yay or it never happened, the Israelis did it. And that is a clear, strong majority in the West Bank. So no, I am a two-state solution at this point, a democratic two-state solution at this point, is obviously unrealistic. And to trust the Palestinian Authority and Mr. Abbas over Hamas, when Mr. Abbas, in effect, endorsed October 7th and has been lying about it and denying it, in effect, ever since, seems, on the face of it, suicidal and counterproductive. Why would you think that the guy who should replace these monsters, Hamas, a guy who endorsed it, a guy who denies it, would be the moderate replacement, and that would result in a peaceful solution? No, it's insane. Insane on the face of it.
And it's especially sad to see, because I've only seen recently Netanyahu pretty much saying Palestinian Authority will never take over Gaza. I mean, maybe I can. No, I think I have the exact quote. After the great, this is from Netanyahu, on December 12th, so only about 9 days ago.
Yeah.
After the great sacrifice of our civilians and our soldiers, I will not allow the entry into Gaza of those who educate for terrorism, support terrorism, and finance terrorism.
Well, that is exactly a description of the Palestinian Authority and even the Fatah Party. I mean, that's what they do. They promote hate. They educate people in Jew hatred, in hatred of Western civilization. I mean, that's how the kids on the West Bank are being educated. Why do you think the polls have such a strong majority either supporting or denying October 7th? I mean, the reason why 70% of the people who live in the West Bank believe that is because that's exactly the kind of lies and monstrous ideology that their children are taught.
And so while I was reading this, and especially with comparison to the Oslo Accords, I immediately the picture came into my mind with the former Prime Minister, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Yitzhak Rabin, and Yasser Arafat, of them shaking hands in front of the White House. If I see the same photo of Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas, I mean, I don't even know what to say. Like how much more how many more like October 7 attacks do we need to like see? Uh
Exactly. Exactly. How much more, how many more atrocities? And there will be, I mean, I know it's the Hamas guy who said more and more, but look, Abbas is justified in every way he can October 7th as self-defensive action. That's his position. He thinks October 7th is either an Israeli plot or hooray, it's cool, because those are the two things he said about it. And that's the moderate alternative to Hamas that we're supposed to embrace as a long-term peaceful solution. It's, as I say, it's absolute utter madness,
yeah,
and
I mean
they have
even
to
yeah,
stop this educational. They have to stop this propaganda. It's the ideology that's the problem. The Palestinians did in the 1990s recognize a framework for peace, which would have them at the end of the process recognizing Israel's right to exist. They never accepted the deal. They accepted the framework, but they never accepted any deal which would require them to recognize Israel. It must be a condition precedent. It must be a prerequisite. You've got to recognize us or we won't even talk. We won't even begin negotiations with you until unless you recognize us first. That must be a condition, a precondition of any negotiations, not something you negotiate over. I'm not going to negotiate with someone over my right to exist. Okay? That is suicide on the face of it. On the face of it. You may as well throw up the white flag. I mean, you get to attempt to kill me on every third day. Okay, what? No. First, you recognize that I have a right to exist, and then and only then can we even begin to think about talking to you.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to just imagine the best possible scenario that the other side is thinking about, that some sort of reformed Palestinian Authority will take over the, I mean, they don't even control West Bank, let alone control Gaza. What's stopping another Hamas just taking over as they did last time? I mean, like I said, the Palestinian Authority doesn't even control West Bank. Just look at the map;
Well,
it's like full of holes.
exactly. That. Well, Israel has had to control much of the West Bank, uh, and even the parts the Palestinians control. They have a hard time containing the Hamas elements. They've got to fight the more radical elements within it. The more radical elements are saying, "You guys are corrupt. You guys are, working with Israel. We don't want to." Even though the Palestinian Authority endorses things like and justifies things like October 7th. So to think that, no, why did Hamas win in, 15, 16 years ago, those elections? Because the radical parties had more support among the people of Gaza than even Abbas did. So just by waving a magic wand, are we going to get the Palestinians in Gaza to accept Abbas? And even if we could wave that magic wand and make him the accepted leader of the people of Gaza, would it do? This guy, like I say, it justifies October 7th himself. What would he do to appease the population that he now has to rule over in Gaza, much less even in the West Bank, where he has a hard time maintaining control because more radical factions are constantly competing with him? Uh, mm, what do we mean by a reformed Palestinian Authority? One that isn't thoroughly corrupt, one that doesn't teach their young people to hate Jews and civilization. I mean, a Palestinian Authority that keeps its books properly about aid coming in. No, it seems like madness to me to negotiate with any of these parties on the face of it. They're murderers. They're justifiers of murder. They're people who've turned down peace repeatedly. These are people whose very existence, their raison d'etre, is to destroy Israel and kill Jews.
Yeah,
And
I'm just trying to find exactly. Do you know how long did Israel control Gaza basically before they handed it over to the Palestinian Authority?
yeah, that would be about 30 years.
So we've seen even after an occupation of 30 years, it's still once you give it to them, this will happen again.
Yes, sir.
Uh,
Yes,
and
sir.
yeah, they want to hand it to them right after this.
Right. The West Bank and Gaza were, and the Golan Heights were all occupied in the late 1960s, after the Six-Day War. And it was controlled until the turn of the 21st century when Israel was considering what to do and just handing it over. And by 2006, the Palestinians were in complete control of Gaza.
Well, let me just read the super chat, I guess. First, thank you, Bonnie, for your super chat, and thank you, Happy Imago. He says, "Thank you for consistently speaking the truth in the time when people are irrationally propping up Hamas and the Palestinians."
Well, thank you. Thank you. We can only do this because of support from people like you. And I just want to thank you. And I want to reach out to everyone else who might be listening to us on the playback or anything else. You're getting an opinion here you're not likely to get in other places, whether on the right or the left, in any international media. And we're creating here, and as Daniel pointed out, soon we'll be talking about all kinds of other issues. We talk about every issue under the sun, applying the ideas of Ayn Rand and creating an international community of serious students of Ayn Rand. And if you think that's an important value, ladies and gentlemen, please become a paid subscriber to the Ayn Rand Center UK at whatever level you're comfortable with. We're doing important work. And if you like the message that we're sending out here, if you agree with our values, then please, it's a win-win.
So we still have a little bit of time. By the way, the link to become a member is at the top of the chat and in the description. Let me also mention, because you mentioned Ayn Rand, and there is basically when the war started, I was like, okay, this is a this is gonna be something. This is a big deal. But for a long time, I wasn't as, let's say, passionate as I would see, for example, Razi or Yubi. I didn't get it why it's so different. And the more I'm like reading about it, the more I see, especially the reaction of the other side, I'm getting increasingly, I don't want to say radicalized, but increasingly like what's going on with these people? Why can they not see what we see?
They don't think in principle. Their eyes, their conceptual integration of the world around them is flawed, deeply, deeply flawed, for philosophical reasons. And we as objectivists are really the only ones who can see that. And so, of course, if if your ethical values are like turn the other cheek, we're the big bad colonializers, we've got the stronger military, so that we've got to take it on the chin, all that altruism stuff that Hamas is taking advantage of in the PR war, that bad ethics, that bad need for Israel to appeal to world opinion. That is a purely philosophical phenomenon, ladies and gentlemen. It comes from our education, comes from our religion. It's the Christian ethics. It's the Kantian duty ethics. It's that stuff that actually shapes the moral debate that's going on here, and the West's reaction, which is all important. These Islamic savages are beyond, I think, rational appeal. On the other hand, it's we in the West and our reaction that is all important. That is all important. These savages will be easier to take out than the Nazis. They do not have the technology. They do not have the wherewithal, frankly. It's not a question of race. It's a question of culture, of course, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not making a racist assertion. But when we do stand up to these totalitarians, it would be easier than, say, taking out the Nazis. it's our willingness to do so that is the only thing preventing us from doing so. And when you look at what's going on college campuses, we've been discussing, for example, young people in America having such a different view of the matter than older people who've lived through the experience. See, Daniel, you're a young guy. You're now starting to live through an experience where it's happened again and again and again with Israel in my lifetime. I am weary myself of having to come back around. So immediately we understood after October 7th, those of us who've lived it long enough to know that the West would crumble. They wouldn't have the moral backbone. We knew what was undermining and had been undermining us for decades. America has, Iran has been at war with America for over 40 years, and America simply refuses to recognize it. We're now over 100 attacks on American bases in the Middle East since October 7th. That's not including the over 100 attacks from the Houthis, who are supported by Iranians and disrupting international shipping in the Red Sea. America refuses to recognize that Iran is at war with them. And we put our heads in the sand trying to prevent an escalation or a widening of the war as Iran happily widens the war ever wider and wider and wider throughout the Middle East. They must be celebrating. They must be partying at the pusillanimous, cowardly inaction of the West when it comes to their aggressive assault throughout the Middle East, including the Red Sea.
So we only have a couple minutes left, so let me just make one last point. Especially with this conflict, I've gotten much bigger appreciation for Ayn Rand and let's say her genius, because a lot of times you hear, especially on the video, oh, she's angry, she's radical, she's extremist. And if I had the full world integration that I believe Ayn Rand had, I'm surprised she was ever calm. I'm surprised she was ever able to not be
No,
like,
actually, most of the time, she was actually a modest, sweet, calm lady. But when you asked her about like the Middle East and Israel, she would turn it on. And back in the interviews in the 70s, she said, this Muslim culture are savages. And Phil Donahue, the American interviewer, whoa, how could you say that about these Palestinians, Ms. Rand? And she said, no, Israel is civilization. These guys are savages. If we don't react to Iran, we'll be paying for it for decades. And she nailed it. No wonder she was upset, and she had every right to be. She wasn't a cultural. We objectivists are not cultural relativists, multiculturalists. We can't say Israel is morally superior to the states around them, culturally and politically superior. Okay, we're not afraid to call savages who do things like October 7th savages. Okay,
and
the perspective you're going to get only here.
So upcoming shows, we have 1 minute 15 seconds, so I have to quickly. So we have the reality show coming up. We'll be talking about Oli Alexander and basically his entry into Eurovision, which is controversial since he basically signed an open letter calling what Israel is doing right now a genocide, and also calling Israel an apartheid state. But let me quickly give you the last piece of news. We've talked, we mentioned it a couple of days ago that there was this accident where basically soldiers killed an Israeli hostages because of miscommunication, because of the fog of war. And there's been this recent news. I'm just going to read it out as it is. Iris, mother of the late Yotam Haim, sent a recording to the 17th Battalion whose soldiers were involved in the incident in which 3 hostages were accidentally killed. And this is one of the things she said in the recording. I hug you here from afar. It's nobody's fault except Hamas.
I'm speechless. I'm speechless at this woman's principled conceptual approach. I would never ask personally someone who had lost a relative. I mean, they're going through their own personal loss, but her ability to see that conceptually and to know who's really responsible for the death of her loved one is inspirational to me. We would say that that's altruism in some context. It isn't. It isn't. She's identifying the actual cause of the loss of her selfish value appropriately. And I deeply admire, and I'm moved, as you can tell, I deeply admire her conceptual capacity here. And I hope that I would have the same psychological strength and heroism that lady does if a loved one of mine were taken and killed.
And with that, thank you, James, and thank you everyone else for watching. We'll be back with the reality show in just a couple of seconds. Bye bye.
Be well.